Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All I can say is, whew. Good to have you back. So, Director Wray, you testified that no court has held that the Fourth Amendment applies to 702 searches, but in 2019, the Second Circuit explained that 702 U.S. person inquiries, quote, does have important Fourth Amendment implications, end quote, and it remanded that case for further review. I know that you testified that you have put in place various protections and accountability features to prevent the misuse or abuse of 702, but my understanding is that prior to your putting in place these kinds of protections, there was something in the order of 2 million U.S. citizen inquiries under 702, and then that has gone down to some 200,000. That's still a lot of queries. So my colleague, Chris Coons, asked, while you have these protocols in place and courts have said you're doing a good job with regard to abuse of 702, but really what is to prevent another administration from removing these protocols? And in fact, I note that during the Trump years, his administration, they interpreted the words derived from in a very broad way under FISA. So I do think that there are a number of us who are concerned about another administration not paying as much attention to abuses as you have testified. And even now, I also have some concerns relating to the U.S. citizen queries under 702. But let me turn to another matter. You did note that there is a heightened environment for foreign terrorism. In your testimony, though, you note that the top domestic terrorism threat we face continues to be from racially motivated violent extremists and anti-government or anti-authority violent extremists. Can you explain how the tech companies, and a lot of this is of people who have been typically radicalized online, can you explain how the tech companies could be better partners in rooting out domestic violent extremism?
Well, some of this goes to the exchanges that we've already had about the encryption issue, and when individuals, we have found historically, move to discussing truly operational, actual violent activity, they tend to move to encrypted platforms, which if those encrypted platforms are not designed in a way to be responsive to a warrant, then that activity, just like the child exploitation we talked about earlier, would be beyond reach. So we need companies to work with us on that. So that's one. Second, the companies have their own terms of service and actions that they can take, and on their own platforms are actions that they could take to help reduce abuse. But most importantly, I think on social media platforms, we need people who are on those platforms, who are Americans who see threats of violence. Again, that's what this is about, threats of violence, to alert law enforcement if they see them.
Well, certainly we can do that, but as you say, just as with the reporting of hate crimes, et cetera, these are all very underreported. And I think that there are concerns about possibly limiting the liability protections under Section 230. Would that be another way to get these platforms to pay attention to content on their platforms?
Well, without weighing on specific legislative proposal, what I would say is that these are gigantic companies now with all kinds of activities, some very positive, some very negative, that happens on their platforms. And just like any industry, it makes sense to me that they should take responsibility for what happens on their platforms. Their duties, unlike ours, unlike this committee's, their duties are to maximize profit for the shareholders. And there's nothing wrong with that being their duties, but that's a very different responsibility than all of us have to protect the American people.
It does sound as though that we need to make some changes to Section 230 liability protections, and I think we need to go there. Let me turn to another important issue. Sex trafficking remains a real issue in Hawaii and to other Native peoples. And in Hawaii, for example, the sex trafficking disproportionately impacts the Native Hawaiian community to the point where Native Hawaiian women and girls represent 67 to 77% of sex trafficking victims and 37% of child trafficking cases in Hawaii. And earlier this year, the FBI launched Operation Not Forgotten to help solve cases of missing and murdered Indigenous people. I think that is a really important step for the FBI to take. And prior to that, you also have in place Operation Cross Country, which is a 13-year program highlighting some of these issues. Can you tell us a bit more about what these programs do and what you hope to accomplish through these programs?
Well, so these programs are designed to both rescue victims of human trafficking and to take down the predators who engage in the human trafficking. And we take a very victim-centered, victim-focused approach. So in addition to rescuing the victims and arresting the predators, our victim services personnel try to engage with the victims to connect them up to social services and things like that, so that we recognize that it's a long road of recovery for them even after they're rescued from the trafficking itself, and we're trying to help get them on the right path that way. Part of the reason things like Operation Cross Country are kind of combined the way they are is to raise awareness for victims and witnesses and deterrence for predators.
I know that Operation Cross Country resulted in the finding of some 6 missing children in Hawaii. I've asked you this before regarding focusing on Native Hawaiian women and girls who are trafficked. And is Operation Not Forgotten in Hawaii?
Is it in Hawaii?
In Hawaii, does it?
I think Operation Not Forgotten is if I recall the name correctly, there is very specific operations in Hawaii that our Honolulu field office and division are conducting, and they do some great work in the human trafficking space, and I'm proud of the work they've done for your community, your citizens, in fact, the citizens, your constituents of the state of Hawaii.
Thank you. I appreciate the effort, and I'm glad that some of my colleagues have asked you about what more we can do regarding the rise in anti-Semitism in our country, especially on our college campuses. Thank you for whatever you can do to assist in that regard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Rono. Senator Holy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, thank you for being here. I noticed with interest in your written testimony that you said, and I'm quoting you now, the FBI uses all tools available at its disposal to combat domestic terrorism, which now apparently includes the crime of being Catholic. Let's talk a little bit about the FBI's egregious targeting of Catholic Americans. You have repeatedly been asked about the memo generated by the Richmond field office, we now know in collaboration with multiple other field offices, about recruiting sources in Catholic churches. You have repeatedly said that no human sources were approached. This is you on July the 12th in the House. You were asked directly by Jim Jordan, do you think that priests ought to be approached to give information on parishioners? You said, no, sir, no, sir. You went on to say, we do not recruit, open, or operate human sources. We do not report on religious organizations. You went on to say, this product, meaning the Richmond memo, has not resulted in any investigative action. But now we know that, in fact, FBI agents did approach a priest and a choir director to ask them to inform on parishioners. So were you lied to when you gave this testimony, or were you lying to Congress?
Neither. So your question conflates two different things. There's the intelligence product itself, which the Richmond field office created. It was written by, as our inspection found, by analysts in Richmond, reviewed by people in Richmond, and captioned Richmond field office product. Separately from that, there was an investigation of a specific individual who was amassing Molotov cocktails and posting about killing people. And it does not surprise me that there were people who knew that subject in that investigation, that is the guy building the Molotov cocktails and trying to kill people, that people talked to the witnesses who knew that person. And I think the product, the Richmond intelligence product, which cites that investigation, is actually pretty transparent about exactly what I just said.
No, I don't think so at all. In fact, the only reason we know this is a whistleblower has come forward and told the House under oath that the FBI went and interviewed priests and choir directors in the Richmond area. The House goes on to say that the FBI has repeatedly refused to disclose this information. The only reason we know it is because a whistleblower came forward with it. Just like the only reason we know about this memo is because a whistleblower came forward with it. How many other parishes around the country have priests or choir directors been approached? By the way, are Catholic choirs now, are they breeding grounds for domestic terrorism? Is this your latest theory? How many other parishes have FBI agents approached priests and choir directors to ask about parishioners?
Look, Senator, we do not and will not conduct investigations based on anybody's exercise of their constitutionally protected religion. You have done
so, and your memo explicitly asks for it. Your memo labels traditional Catholics as racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists in need of investigation. You have a list of churches, a list in the memo. You've repeatedly said we don't target churches, we don't list churches. They're listed in the memo. So how many other parishes have you gone to talk to choir directors, for heaven's sake?
As I've
know the answer to that question.
No, I don't know the answer to that question, but I can tell you that we don't investigate people for their exercise of their constitutionally protected religious expression. That particular intelligence product is something that as soon as I saw it, I was aghast. I had it withdrawn.
Really, you were aghast?
I was.
Oh, really? And
yes,
what
sir.
have you done about it? Did you fire the people who wrote it?
No, I had it withdrawn.
Have you fired anybody involved in it?
Senator, if you would give me a chance to answer
That's a yes or a no. It's not hard. Have you fired anyone involved in the writing of that outrageous memo, about which, frankly, you've repeatedly misled the public? Yes or no?
The individuals involved in that product
have you fired anyone?
Just a minute. Were not found to have engaged in any intentional or bad faith conduct. And in fact, Senator, a number of the individuals involved in writing that product in the Richmond office were themselves Catholics. So the notion that they were targeting their own faith
so they
is
have a
nonsense.
get out of jail free card. I see. So you're immune and they're immune. So we shouldn't ask questions about it. You haven't done a darn thing. You haven't fired anybody. In fact, what the House found is, what is it? You admonished them. They were admonished. And their respective supervisors were told to engage with the Human Resources Division to ensure that deficiencies are addressed. Oh, well, I feel much better. They've been sent to bed without food. Good heavens, Director. This is one of the most outrageous targetings. You have mobilized your division, the most powerful law enforcement division in the world, against traditionalist Catholics, whatever the heck that means. And you're just told us you have not fired a single person. I mean, here, it gets worse. Your Richmond field office, they thought there was nothing wrong with this. The House interviewed the head of the Richmond field office. He testified. It's all here in the public report. I refer you to it, pages 12, 13, 14. He testified he saw no problem with this. He said he thought it was fine. In fact, we have internal memoranda of the members of the field office high-fiving. One peer reviewer, another member of the field office wrote, "I think this is a great product. I really enjoyed the read." Do you have a problem with systemic bigotry against Catholics in the FBI?
No.
What are you going to do about this? Are you going to fire these people or not?
Those individuals have all been admonished, and it is all going into their, if you would let me finish my answer, it is all going into their annual performance reviews, which has direct impact on their compensation, among other things.
Oh, I see. Oh, I see. I see. So the 60 million American Catholics who now learn that your FBI has recommended that priests be recruited as informants. Your FBI has gone to priests, choir directors, but we're to feel better because you've admonished them for their wrongdoing.
You, again, are conflating two different things.
I'm not. I am taking your testimony where you said you do not. You said categorically, you said we do not go to priests and ask them about their parishioners. You said we do not. You didn't say we haven't. You didn't say we won't. You said we don't. It turns out you do, and you kept it from the public. You deliberately misled Congress about it, and the only reason we know about it is because a whistleblower came forward.
I just
That's
fundamentally disagree with your
Well,
characterization.
there's no characterization. The facts are the facts, and I fundamentally resent the fact that you have violated, if not the spirit, if not the letter, certainly the spirit of the First Amendment, and used your law enforcement agency against Catholics in this nation. Let me ask you about one other thing. Last time you were here, you had to leave early to take a jet to your vacation in the Adirondacks. Now, let me just ask you this. A whistleblower tells us that you also maintain a home in Atlanta to which you fly on a regular basis. I'm told by this whistleblower from the FBI that you use the FBI jet to make that travel. Is that correct?
All of my travel, personal or work-related, is required to be done on FBI planes. That is longstanding policy. It goes back well over a decade.
I'll take that as a yes. The whistleblower also says that you regularly require the jet, which is based in Manassas, to be flown to D.C. because, and I quote now, Wray doesn't like to sit in traffic. Is that accurate?
No, that's not accurate.
He also says that you pay only the lowest cost commercial ticket for that Atlanta to D.C. trip, which is, I don't know, what, $200 or something, when, of course, it costs $20,000, $30,000 to operate the jet. Is that correct?
The reimbursement that I provide is reimbursement that is set by OMB policy, and I follow that policy, which goes back over a decade, and I think has been chronicled in a GSA report from back in like 2013.
You provide all the records to this committee of your travel and relevant use
I'll
of the
provide
FBI
whatever
jet?
information is appropriate, absolutely.
Well, appropriate. I mean, everything that we asked for?
We will follow up with you about providing information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Wray, for returning. I associate myself with the comments of my colleagues in appreciating you for your service and those who serve under your leadership for doing the work to protect the country. I have a couple different topics I'd like to talk with you a little bit about. One is concerning what it is that your team might be learning and or seeing as trends now post the Dobbs decision. Where after 50 years of precedent set by Roe versus Wade, we got a Dobbs decision where the preliminary data has been showing that there's been an increase in attacks against medical clinics that provide abortion-related health care. In my own state of California, this dangerous behavior has reared its head as of late, where there are 3 men who were involved in conspiring to firebomb a reproductive health clinic. Talk to me a little bit, Director Wray, and sort of share with the American public what the FBI and your agencies have been doing post-Dobbs decision. What trends are you seeing relative to the threats facing reproductive health clinics?
Sure, happy to take that on. Some things you will probably expect, some things you might not expect. In the category of things that you might expect, certainly we continue to see violence against a variety of establishments motivated by views on abortion. And you've mentioned a few cases in your question. And we pursue those cases through, on the criminal side, through the FISA Act, and in some instances, if there's more of a terrorism angle, we might be pursuing explosive charges or what have you through our Joint Terrorism Task Force. That part you would probably expect, and that continues apace. What you might not expect, though, is that of the investigations that have been opened based on tips and leads and activity that we've seen since the leak of the Dobbs decision, is that actually we've seen a huge uptick in violence against pro-life facilities, not just abortion clinics and so forth. And we just recently had a case where we had an individual who had tried to firebomb a pro-life facility in Madison, Wisconsin. And our folks did some great work with DNA off of a burrito to be able to apprehend the suspect. And so we've seen violence on both sides of the issue. And the reason I bring that up is because it's important for Americans to understand that I don't care, we don't care what side of the abortion issue you're on. You don't get to engage in violence to express your views. That's where we get involved, and that's where the line gets crossed.
Are there, let me move to a different topic. There has been a lot of conversation, a lot of questions asked of you today that you've responded to relative to the increase in hate crimes directed towards the Jewish community, directed towards the Muslim community, and I too join my colleagues in the concern and appreciate the work of the FBI in those areas. And the last time you were before this committee, I asked you specifically about hate crimes directed towards the LGBT plus community. There's data that continues to illuminate the fact that there's increased hate crimes directed towards the AAPI community in the country, and it continues to be noted and documented the rise in hate crimes directed toward Black Americans in the country. Here's my question: what is the work the FBI is doing directed towards hate crimes generally? What are you doing? What can you do? And what can we do as a Congress, as a committee, to better equip you to help to increase both the reporting as well as the prevention of these crimes motivated by hate?
Well, I can speak more to what we can do and what we are doing. Both on the investigative side, we're making a conscious point of trying to work with our law enforcement partners to find the cases, to pursue them, even if federal charges, because of the particularities of what the federal statute requires, even if federal charges are not easily prosecutable, if state charges are brought, then we don't just check out. We, FBI, continue to help our state and local partners to ensure that there's accountability and justice brought through state charges. We have elevated civil rights crimes, including specifically hate crimes as the highest priority within those, to a national threat priority over the last couple of years, and that has increased the amount of resources we can devote to it. In addition, you mentioned reporting and prevention. One of the things we know about hate crimes really across the whole spectrum of victims is that they're underreported. And so one of the things that we're doing and other public figures could do is to try to reach out to individual communities to educate them about hate crimes and where they can go to report it. So if they're a witness, a victim, they know where to go and what to do about it. We also engage with local law enforcement because sometimes they don't necessarily recognize what to do with individual fact patterns that might become a hate crime. So those are some of the things that we're doing to try to increase the fidelity of the statistics on this, because that helps us identify trends and figure out how to allocate resources and investigative priority. So it's investigative, it's support, it's outreach, it's education, raising awareness.
The last question that I have, Director Wray, thank you for that. Since I've been a member of this body, this is the second time that I've got the opportunity to talk with you, and each time, each instance, you have raised your concern and heightened awareness about the potential threat of violence directed towards this country from other nation states. I want to talk a little bit about attacks on our electric grid. Particularly in the past few years, the U.S. has seen a record surge in the number of attacks on the electric grid and physical attacks, including 2 bombings in my state, in San Jose, California last winter, that left thousands of residents without power. I know you know the details, and so I'll skip the storytelling, but Director Wray, what updates can you share about the FBI's investigation into the recent string of physical attacks on our electric grid, and what steps have you taken to improve and coordinate the data collection relative to protecting our physical infrastructure?
Well, of course, you're asking about the physical attacks on the electric grid. Obviously, there are also a whole range of cyber attacks on the electric grid as well, but just focusing on the physical attacks, we have seen an increasing number of attacks on substations and things like that for a variety of motivations. So, for example, in Baltimore, we had a fairly well-known case not that long ago of a couple of individuals who were attempting to cause chaos. These were racially motivated violent extremists who wanted to essentially cause this cascading power failure, attacking 5 substations in the Baltimore area. And thankfully, we were able to disrupt that attack. But we've also seen people attacking substations for non-ideological reasons, including, I think, out in the Pacific Northwest somewhere, there was a case that individuals were trying to facilitate a robbery, and they wanted to bring down the power grid to essentially enhance their ability to conduct a robbery. So there was a financial motive in that instance. And we've also had just straight out vandalism. So there's a bunch of different motivations. But what they have in common is a targeting of the electric grid, of the substations. And so we are working more and more closely, not just with DHS, but Department of Energy and other regulatory partners to try to give them better information so that they can figure out how to better harden their infrastructure.
Thank you, Senator Butler. Senator Cotton.
Director Wray, in your written statement, you mentioned anti-Semitic attacks, and in your opening statement this morning, you said that the FBI seeks to mitigate them quickly. Has there been an increase in anti-Semitic attacks since the October 7th atrocity against Israel?
Yes, and what's striking about that is that that's coming on the heels of what we were already seeing, even before October 7th, as a significant uptick, not just of hate-fueled attacks, but specifically anti-Semitic hate-fueled attacks as a portion of those. And by far and away, the biggest chunk of the tips and leads, which are coming in fast and constantly to us post-October 7th, the biggest chunk by far involve threats to the Jewish community. We've seen bomb threats to synagogues, threats to attack the Jewish community on campuses and other places. We've had multiple arrests. So it is a real problem. And as I think I testified maybe recently, what's so jarring about those attacks is that the Jewish community in this country is like 2.5% of the American public, and yet they represent something close to 60% of all religiously based hate crimes. And they have the unique distinction of being targeted by Sunni terrorists, Shia terrorists, domestic terrorists, inspired terrorists, and so we are acutely focused on the threats to the Jewish community, which very much needs our help.
Thank you. I share your concerns about those threats and the disproportionate nature of the threats to Jews in America. Federal civil rights laws do protect Jews from these anti-Semitic hate crimes and racist acts of violence to include their criminal provisions. Is that right?
Yes.
I want to focus on one particularly egregious incident of such anti-Semitism. On Thanksgiving Day, a pro-Palestinian mob showed up at the home of Michael Tushin in Los Angeles. Mr. Tushin is no random private citizen. He is the president of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, also known as AIPAC, one of the strongest supporters of the American-Israel Alliance and an organization with broad bipartisan support in Congress. This mob was there for no other reason than that Mr. Tushin is Jewish and that he is the president of AIPAC and a supporter of Israel. The mob set off smoke bombs with dense black smoke to make him and his family think their house was on fire. They blared sirens. They dumped fake blood and infant-sized body bags in his driveway. They vandalized cars that were parked in the driveway. They distributed flyers around the neighborhood with Mr. Tushin's photo and a message that there would be, quote, no peace, end quote, for him as long as AIPAC supports Israel. When a neighbor tried to intervene during a lengthy wait for the police to arrive, one member of this mob attacked the neighbor with a metal pole. Director Wray, has the FBI made any arrests in these hate crimes in Los Angeles that have been so widely publicized in the media?
Well, I don't know if it's part of the same investigation, but I know, for example, post-October 7th, we have had arrests of individuals in L.A., in the L.A. area specifically, individuals who were threatening, for example, the ADL CEO and a number of people in ADL leadership. And a lot of the cases that we've been advancing post-October 7th involve threats that sound very similar to the one you're describing.
These go beyond threats. They showed up at his home on Thanksgiving Day and vandalized his home and attacked a neighbor. The organization is known as the People's City Council of Los Angeles, who post videos and photos up on their account along with the message, quote, "No peace for these baby killers, F APAC," hashtag pre-Palestine. And to be clear, they didn't use the PG version of the four-letter expletive starting with F in their social media post. So are you aware of the FBI either conducting arrests in this against this mob at Mr. Tushin's house or even investigating?
As I sit here right now, I don't know specifically. We've had so many investigations, as I said in our earlier exchange, that are focused on threats or more than threats against the Jewish community all around the country. Let me follow up and see if we can get more information on that specific case.
I would very much appreciate that because it is the case that the history of our federal civil rights laws, especially the criminal provisions of them, go back to a time when local authorities refused to protect the civil rights of their people. This is paradigmatically in the post-Civil War era when local Democratic officials in the South wouldn't protect the rights of freed black slaves. But color me very skeptical that notorious Democrat George Gascon, the prosecuting attorney for the County of Los Angeles, is going to zealously pursue criminal charges against this mob that showed up at Mr. Tushin's home and assaulted one of his neighbors. So I would very much appreciate you following up with me personally to know that the FBI is at a minimum investigating this mob and the violent attack on one of Mr. Tushin's neighbors. And I hope they'll do so zealously using some of the many techniques that have been used. And for example, the prosecutions of Donald Trump, where the Department of Justice has gone so far as to subpoena people who retweeted or liked Donald Trump's social media posts, or the investigations into the January 6 rioters, where facial recognition technology and cell phone location data has been used. If these are good enough for those investigations, I think they should be good enough for this investigation as well, which, again, I don't think that George Gascon is going to zealously pursue.
Well, as I said, we will follow up with you directly about this particular matter. I will tell you, in the meantime, that my instructions to our people are very much along the lines of my comments here today, which is the Jewish community needs us, and we need to be leaning forward.
Well, thank you for that. And as I said, in citing their social media accounts where they post photos and videos of it, these are not criminal masterminds. This should not be a tough case for anyone to crack. I'm sure the LAPD would be happy to investigate and arrest if they thought Mr. Gascon would actually pursue charges. Absent that, I hope that the FBI and the Department of Justice uses the full extent of federal criminal civil rights laws to make sure that this pro-Hamas mob faces legal consequences. Thank you.
Senator Ossoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Director Wray, good to see you again. And you know I never fail to mention that Georgia is proud of you. We love seeing you when you come back home. Hope you will again soon. You and I have spoken before about the dangerous increase in the frequency of sextortion crimes targeting children, young children who are lured or targeted to share compromising or explicit photos and then blackmailed or bullied or worse on the basis of that content. Senator Blackburn and Senator Grassley and I have together moved legislation through this committee aimed at helping prevent the sexual abuse of children online. Your field office in Atlanta recently again highlighted sextortion as a particular concern in Georgia. The Atlanta field office said that these schemes have increased in frequency by 700% since 2021. Can you please provide an update on the FBI's overall efforts to investigate and prevent these crimes targeting children online?
So this is a rapidly emerging threat to the youth of America. It's not, when I say rapidly emerging, it's not that it's brand new. As you and I have discussed, it's been emerging for some time, but what's newer is that it's really bursting into prominence in the last, let's say, year and a half in particular. And that's mostly a bad thing because of how prevalent it is, but it is also a reflection of potentially a little bit of a good thing, which is growing awareness, and we need more awareness of this. What is the FBI doing? We're aggressively investigating these cases. We just recently had a case, for example, where a very tragic case in Michigan where a young teenager male committed suicide because he was basically in exactly one of these kinds of cases, was essentially egged on when he couldn't pay the money, and he was explaining he didn't have the money, egged on to kill himself, and he did. And we pursued, in that case, the wrongdoers who were all the way over in Nigeria. We worked with our Nigerian partners, got the individuals involved arrested, had them brought back, extradited back to the U.S. to face trial here, as a way of demonstrating that you are never beyond our reach, and that we're going to pursue these cases really to the far corners of the globe. But the second thing, and part of the reason I bring up that case as an example, is that it's very important to raise awareness, because I think a lot of the kids who are falling victim to this, when they get targeted, they don't think they have a choice. They feel like they're trapped and stuck, and then turn to tragic consequences like suicide. So raising awareness is not just raising awareness for parents, but it's raising awareness for teenagers so that they know there's something they can do. So we're working with NCMEC, for example, but in that Michigan case, to their great credit, the young man's parents sort of embraced the idea of using his case, his tragic death, as a way to try to prevent other kids from falling victim to the same thing. And it's really deeply moving that they would try to find some good that they can achieve through the just heartbreaking loss of their son.
Thank you, Director Wray, and that is obviously a top concern for parents in Georgia, and so is the opioid crisis and how it impacts high school students. Several news outlets reported recently that multiple students overdosed on fentanyl in one Gwinnett County high school, that none of the students knew they were consuming fentanyl. One was reportedly using a vape pen. Earlier this year, students in Lee County in southwest Georgia reportedly hospitalized, again after using a vape that was reportedly laced not just with THC, but also with fentanyl. Thankfully, all of the students survived. Can you lay out for my constituents back in Georgia what the FBI is doing to protect children and adolescents from opioids, from fentanyl, and increasingly as we see the inadvertent overdose by students who are either vaping or perhaps think they're taking some other drug or a counterfeit prescription drug?
Well, of course, you're rightly flagging that one of the really pernicious parts of the crisis, the fentanyl scourge that we're dealing with right now, is that it's getting pressed into or incorporated into all sorts of other things. So you've got, it's bad enough for the people taking it intentionally because they're addicted, but the people who are unwittingly taking it, whether it's in their prescriptions or something else, is a huge problem. So what is the FBI doing? Well, I'd start with what I said in my opening, which is just in the last 2 years, the FBI has seized enough fentanyl to kill 270 million Americans. That's essentially 80% of the American public. That's just our work. Obviously, we have lots of partners doing great work too, and just the last 2 years. That's a start. A few other things we're doing. We are targeting the cartels. We have over 300 investigations focused on the cartel leadership and them as the source of supply. We are focusing on the distribution side of it here in the U.S. Violent gangs, our Safe Streets task forces are focused on those. We are targeting the professionals, in effect, the healthcare profession, where they become part of it, pill mills and things like that, that are also part of the problem through our prescription drug initiative. We are also targeting the darknet marketplaces where an awful lot of this stuff is being trafficked. We have a whole thing called J-Code with lots of other agencies that we lead that is dismantling darknet marketplaces of opioids. And then from an awareness perspective, we are doing things like we worked with DEA to create a movie called Chasing the Dragon that was shown in schools, and we've got other sort of outreach awareness raising that's focused on schools and youth and educators to try to get at it on the demand side too.
Thank you, Director Wray. And with my remaining time, you've touched on this in response to a number of members, but Georgia's Jewish community, Georgia's Muslim community, both expressing to me their deep anxiety at this moment, the increased level of threat, the increased explicit threats, the increased perception of threat and fear. Can you please provide some reassurance to my Jewish and Muslim constituents about how seriously the FBI is taking community protection? And by the way, thank you to your field office in Atlanta and Special Agent Farley for the work that they've done to help reassure my constituents as well.
So we are working those cases both through our joint terrorism task forces, but also through, on the criminal side, through our civil rights program as hate crimes. So we've got sort of both engines, if you will, in the FBI focused on it. We also have I created in 2019 a domestic terrorism hate crimes fusion cell, which brings together expertise to try to anticipate where the threats are going. We have opened, I think, 60% more hate crimes investigations post-October 7th than we had before October 7th, and it was escalating pretty fast before October 7th, too. And we've got all of our field offices, as you mentioned, with SAC Farley in Atlanta, not just pushing the investigations, but engaging in a lot of outreach to affected communities in their areas. Both to reassure them, as you say, but also to kind of raise awareness like, hey, we're here. If you see something, we want to know about it because there are things we can do to help.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Director, it seems to me that some people should not have power. I don't care how smart they are. I don't care how experienced they are. They just don't have enough maturity or morality or ethics to exercise power. And I am talking, of course, about your predecessor. You have been a significant improvement. Unlike my experience with you, and what I've observed is that unlike your predecessor, you're not egomaniacal, and you're not egocentric, and you're not a self-aggrandizer. You don't run around like your predecessor going, look at me, look at me. You don't leak to the press like the Titanic. And I know that's a low bar, but I appreciate it. You talk a lot about 38,000 women and men in the FBI, the vast majority of whom do an extraordinary job, and I agree with that. Most of those women and men that you're talking about are in your field offices. I'm not saying there aren't some in the Washington office. But the problems we've had with the FBI over the past decade, you've alluded to them, have come primarily out of the Washington office. I listened carefully to your recitation of your efforts to clean that up. But I think most fair-minded Americans still wonder if there has been real accountability in all cases. And that's the spirit in which I'm going to ask you these questions. Who made the decision at the FBI to raid Mar-a-Lago for those documents?
Well, I'm not sure there's a specific person that made the decision. It was the investigative team that was on that investigation, working with the prosecutors on the case.
Why didn't you just do a consent to search and avoid all the drama?
Well,
you, but whoever made the decision.
Yeah. Well, let me try it this way, because obviously we are talking now about not just an ongoing investigation, that's not just an ongoing investigation that's being led by a special counsel, but an ongoing investigation being led by special counsel that's in front of a court with likely very strong views about what it is I can say publicly, which gets at some of your gracious comments about public commentary about cases. But I think if you, in that particular instance, if you look at the affidavit in support of the search warrant, and more importantly, the pleadings that were filed by the prosecutors in the case, they lay out in a very detailed way all the efforts that were made to ensure compliance short of proceeding to a search, as well as now has been charged, actual obstruction of justice. And so, in my experience, again, speaking more generally now, both as a line prosecutor and now as FBI director, when it comes to obtaining classified information, retrieving it, we typically pursue the least intrusive means possible, but if those don't work, and certainly if there's obstruction of justice, which in this case as found by a probable cause standard by the judge, then it's pretty typical to resort to a search warrant.
Of course, as you know as well as I do, that the FBI cannot censor American speech. It talks about abridging speech, that our First Amendment does. At one time, I think it was during your tenure, the FBI had 80 FBI agents working with social media, encouraging social media to take down accounts and remove, quote, disinformation and election interference. A district court found that the FBI and other agencies asked social media platforms to remove content and to change their moderation policies in a way that violated the First Amendment. And it went up to the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit limited the injunction, but here's what the Fifth Circuit said. The FBI, quote, likely coerced the platforms into moderating content and encouraged them to do so by effecting changes in their moderation policies, end quote, in violation of the First Amendment. The FBI agreed with the plaintiffs that, quote, I'm quoting the Fifth Circuit, federal agents ran afoul of the First Amendment by coercing and significantly encouraging social media platforms to censor disfavored speech, including by threats of adverse government action, like antitrust enforcement and legal reforms. That's serious. Is the Fifth Circuit wrong?
Well, as you may know, first off, let me just say the opinions talk about a whole bunch of other executive agencies besides the FBI, and I'm not going to speak to what the other agencies did or didn't do. But
well, you weren't the only one. It was the White House. It was Homeland Security. But your folks were there too, all 80 of them, 80 agents.
Well, but
combing social media every day, calling Twitter, calling Facebook, take that down. Get rid of that account. And it wasn't just on election interference. It was on COVID vaccines. It was on lockdowns.
So a couple things, and I appreciate the opportunity to clarify this. So first, on things like COVID vaccines and stuff like that, the FBI had no role in telling anybody to take anything down. In fact, as you may know, the FBI was the only agency back at that time, and the only agency in the entire intelligence community to reach the conclusion, to moderate confidence, that the origins of the pandemic were most likely a lab leak in China. We were the only agency, so we most certainly were not encouraging anybody to communicate differently on that. Second, even on the topics we did communicate with social media companies about, from everything I've seen, we in fact did not instruct anybody to take that information down. As to the Fifth Circuit's opinion, as you may also know, we actually hotly contest a lot of the findings, and not just the legal conclusions, but the actual factual findings, and have the department has sought Supreme Court review, asked them to vacate the injunction. The Supreme Court's not only vacated the injunction, but granted cert, so I probably should
Let me
leave it at
stop you a
that.
second. I've gone way over. I want to ask you one last question. We had a controversy during the election about Mr. Hunter Biden's laptop. And at that time, you had 80 agents interfacing with social media, doing whatever they were doing. The FBI had the Hunter Biden laptop, got it on December 9th, 2019. The New York Post story, which a lot of the social media companies at the suggestion of government took down, the story came out on 10/14/2020. Why didn't the FBI just say, hey, the laptop's real? Why didn't you just tell everybody the laptop's real? We're not vouching for what's on it, but it's real. This isn't a fiction.
Well, as you might imagine, the FBI cannot, especially in a time like that, be talking about an ongoing investigation. Second, I would tell you that at least my understanding is that both the FBI folks involved in the conversations and the Twitter folks involved in the conversations both say that the FBI did not direct Twitter to suppress.
But others were
story.
in government.
Well, I can't speak to others in government. That's part of the point that I was trying to make, because the Fifth Circuit's opinion.
But you're the FBI. You're not part of the White House and part of Homeland Security. You're not supposed to be political. You see all this controversy going on. Why didn't the FBI say, time out, folks, we're not getting in the middle of this, but the laptop's real?
Again, we have to be very careful about what we can say, especially in the middle of an election season, because that's precisely some of the problems that led to my predecessors' negative findings from the Inspector General.
Did you hear a gavel?
Thank you, Senator
heard a
Kennedy.
gavel.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Booker?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say that Senator Kennedy is Santa Claus of spirit, but he is the Grinch when it comes to stealing my time. But it's good to see him as always.
I'm sorry.
Director Wray, it's good to see you again. I just want to say at the top, as often, I don't get often enough to say it to you, but having years and years of working with FBI agents, especially in New Jersey, I just know that you represent an organization of extraordinarily noble people who do things on a daily basis to protect us and to keep us safe that most Americans don't know about. And in this time of year, especially just that heroism, I just want to recognize it at the top. I listened in my office to a lot of the earlier questioning, and I'm just really grateful for how much of an emphasis you've been putting on the safety and security of Americans to racist and religious hate. It was literally hours after the October 7th attacks. I was in Israel that I reached out to my colleagues in the Democratic caucus and said that we have to get more money for the nonprofit security grants, and I'm glad that there seems to be bipartisan movement to that. I appreciate the comments of a lot of my colleagues, especially Tom Cotton, Michael Tuchin. I know him well, and what happened at his house is galling, but as you said, it's indicative of a lot of the violence. In fact, when it comes to anti-Semitism, it's the top form of religious hate and hate violence we see. I want to drill down a little bit about the violence that we're seeing and the threats on the Muslim community, because there's a lot of issues with trust when it comes to the FBI and the Muslim community. And having seen, when I was mayor of the city of Newark, unjust surveillance and the erosion of a lot of that trust, not of the FBI in particular, but of law enforcement in general, I just want to know from you, what are you doing, what steps are you taking to try to be restorative of trust, to make sure at a time of vulnerability where Muslims are being targeted with hate, an Arab community in larger context is, what are you doing to especially build that trust, to know that you as an agency can be relied upon for their safety?
Well, I appreciate your comments and your focus on the issue. Certainly, we, through every one of our field offices, have as a point of emphasis community outreach, and within community outreach, there are specific communities that they make a conscious point of trying to build bridges with. The Muslim community, the Arab American community are specific parts of that. The good news is that it didn't take October 7th and the aftermath for us to start doing that. I've been to all 56 field offices twice, each of them, many of them 3 times, and I've seen with my own 2 eyes the relationships that they've built with the Muslim and Arab American communities in their areas. And so we've just continued to try to double down on that post-October 7th to make sure that they know we're there for them if they experience threats or violence. There have been tips and leads, reports of threats that have come in. The chairman mentioned the attack against the unconscionable attack against the 6-year-old boy in his area, but we've had other attacks as well. So we're trying to make sure that they know we're there for them. I will tell you on a personal level, I've, as somebody who was in FBI headquarters on 9/11, I have never forgotten, as a young leader in the Justice Department at the time, couldn't have been more than 4 days maybe after 9/11, President Bush, in the middle of all the tension that existed at the time, making a conscious point of speaking, I believe it was at a mosque, and making clear that we're at war with terrorism, we're not at war with Islam.
Thank you.
And that really always kind of moved me that he had made that step at that time, because it would have been the easy thing to do, not to do that.
No, I'm grateful for that as well, and grateful for your visits. I imagine Newark was a 3-visit place, not a 2-visit place.
I think my 3rd visit is imminent.
Okay, that's good to know. The Executive Order 14110 directed federal law enforcement agencies to produce a report on the use of AI in the criminal justice system and recommend best practices for law enforcement. The report builds on Executive Order 14074, which directed the Attorney General to issue best practices, policy changes, and procurement guidelines for advanced law enforcement technologies, including facial recognition, other biometric technology, and predictive algorithms. Can you provide the committee with an update on the reporting requirements, including an estimate for when you expect to release the guidance on advanced law enforcement technologies in light of the fact that the deadline set in the EO has passed?
Let me circle back with you on that. I know we have an entire team of people working very closely with the department and others on this issue. And I wasn't aware that there was a deadline that we'd missed, so let me see if there's some garble in the process, but I will make sure we circle back to you on it.
Yeah, and finally, I found every interaction I've had with you directly or your office on 702 really compelling. From sitting in classified briefings to talking to administration officials, and your comments at the top of the hearing were again very, very compelling. I think you heard that this is an issue that is in both parties. There are a lot of concerns, and when Mike Lee was speaking, he talked about a lot of the violations of what we would both agree is just egregious violations of what 702 should be about. The reforms that have been put forward and the work that's been done to correct for them. But I'm concerned, I trust you, but I learned when it comes to leadership, there's a difference between time tellers and clock builders. Time tellers are those people that their leadership is so powerful, everybody knows the time and goes accordingly. But the best leaders are those that help to build mechanisms that no matter who's the leader, the protections, the security, the knowledge is there. And so when you hear some of these egregious mistakes, can you tell us in testimony now that you're pretty confident that the abuses that were talked about so openly here in this hearing, that those abuses cannot and will not happen going forward?
I can pledge to you and to this committee that we have put in place new measures that exceed anything that's ever been in place before, that we are focused on a goal of getting to 100% compliance. But I can also tell you that, and I understand why we've brought this on ourselves to some extent, and I hear that. I hear that in Senator Lee's comments. I understand why that is there, but that's why I point to the court itself and the department itself looking hard at our compliance post all these reforms, because these are the same people and the same kinds of documents that have discussed all these problems of the past. They're the ones now saying they're seeing 98% compliance. And these are reforms that we've had in place since really only just the middle of 2021. So it's not just take my word for it. I get that. It's, trust but verify, and there's a verification piece that's occurred here. And we think that to the extent that there's a desire to cement those reforms for the long run, that's what legislation could do. Yeah.
My time has expired, and I'll just say in conclusion, and I know you know this intellectually, but I actually know you feel this in your heart. My lived tradition is the African-American experience, and clearly the FBI has a very bad history with the black community in the 50s, 60s. Before that, the assurances are critical, and I still have, like the chairman said in his opening remarks, some concerns about how do we ensure that the most sacred ideals of our country aren't violated by law enforcement, especially for communities that have seen historic targeting. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. The last few weeks, I've been demanding some answers on Jeffrey Epstein's crimes and trying to get these flight records. I've offered amendments to a subpoena, trying to get that, and kind of been stonewalled on it, but I think having transparency around Jeffrey Epstein's conduct and this massive sex trafficking ring that he built is important. And of course, you've had the chairman, Senator Hirano, Senator Ossoff, all who have mentioned our concerns with what is happening with CSAM, what is happening with sex trafficking. But in light of this, in looking at some of the survivors from the Epstein issues, there are disturbing allegations that the FBI failed to investigate the sex trafficking allegations. And indeed, one survivor says that the FBI, even after she brought forward repeatedly content about his conduct, that the FBI refused to investigate her claims, even though she said the allegations were there on both the sex trafficking and the child sexual abuse material. And I want to know why or what awareness you have of the FBI's failure to investigate these claims. And I want to get you on the record, since numerous survivors have said the FBI did not show up to help them. What specifically has the FBI done to investigate the claims that Epstein's and others participated in, produced, possessed, and distributed CSAM?
Well, first let me say I recall very well that you have a very specific and longstanding interest, not just in child sexual exploitation, but in human trafficking as a cousin of that. And we appreciate your focus on it and your support of the importance of that part of our mission. As to the Epstein case specifically, I will tell you it's been a while since I looked at that case. Obviously, we worked together with prosecutors to bring charges before he...
I realize that.
Yeah.
But what we need from you is a complete investigation of why the FBI did not take this up, and then getting to the bottom of what is appearing to be an enormous sex trafficking ring and listening to these survivors. And as I said, I've tried to get a subpoena on the flight logs, which I think is important to this. I think people need to know who was on those planes and how often they were on those planes. I think people who invest in companies would want to know if there are people from their C-suite. And as we go through this, should those logs be made public? They've been heavily redacted.
Well, as I said, it's been a while since I looked at the specific case. I can tell you that we've been increasing year over year, both the number of agents focused on these kinds of cases, the number of victims we've rescued. And so onto the specific case, let me offer to have let me get with my team and figure out if there's more information we can provide to you.
That would be great. Yeah. We have never, even through the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, we never got to the bottom of this, and we have these survivors who say, oh, there is so much more. They swept it under the rug, and that is wrong, and you need to right that wrong. Let me ask you about some of the disturbing allegations that have come out of Special Counsel Jack Smith's political crusade against President Trump. And we've seen a heavily redacted search warrant. Here you go with the first page. Here you've got a page that's in print, another in print, another in print. Attachment B in print, all about the subject account. Page 3 that I'm going to come back to in a minute, and then look at the rest. Redactions, redactions, redacted, fully redacted, fully redacted, fully redacted, there and there. So that's very helpful. When things are so heavily redacted, you can't get to the information. Now, Tennesseans are very concerned about two tiers of justice and weaponizing of the government. But what we see from this search warrant, and here it is on page, let me go to page 2 first. That gives you what they're getting from the subject account, which is Trump's account. You're going to see that on page 1 and page 2, and the information that is there. They're wanting to get at his Twitter account everybody that had access to it and all the informations. Well, then when you go to page 3, they are going to subpoena all data and information that is associated with this, and anybody that reposted information on this that favorited or retweeted post by the account, as well as all tweets that include the username associated, all synced, all contacts, and this covers October 2020 to January 2021. Are you aware of this?
I've seen some of the media reporting about it, but obviously this is a matter that's being led by this. Well, again, this is an ongoing investigation being led by a special counsel, and there are all kinds of court restrictions that apply.
Somebody approved a search warrant for everybody that was retweeting or reposting from the Ayatollah's account. Have they gone to his account prior to October 7th and looked at that? This is such an invasion of free speech. And as we talk with you about social media and what is going on with social media, we're concerned about this. You know, if I liked a tweet from President Trump, if anybody on this side of the dais retweeted a tweet from President Trump, according to this, Jack Smith could go pull everything affiliated with our Twitter account. If anything that came from that real Donald Trump showed up in our feed, do you think that this is an infringement of my free speech?
Well, let me say this. I certainly understand the concern, but what I would tell you is,
so.
But what I would tell you is that this investigation being led by the special counsel. It's not appropriate for me to comment on that ongoing investigation. It's also under the supervision of a court, which includes the search warrant.
Yes. Is code word for we are stonewalling, and we hear this from you all repeatedly, and it's really quite frustrating.
No, ma'am, and I understand why it's frustrating, but that policy about not commenting on ongoing investigations is one that goes back decades. Republican and Democratic administrations. It's not something that's just invented.
These investigations are not coming to completion. Thank you, Mr.
Senator Blackburn, before you leave, I want to make a point for the record, since I understand you made some statements about the Jeffrey Epstein flight logs. There's a Fox reporter in the hallway who asked me about this, and I said I had not spoken to you one time about this issue. I think you'll back me up on that. I'm not mistaken. I didn't know that this was even a subject of your amendments, which, if you'll recall, you were the first on the list until the 2-hour rule was invoked. I don't know anything about this request on your part. I'll be happy to discuss it with you. but I haven't done any discussion with you to this point, correct?
Mr. Chairman, I know, and I think you're fully aware that I had two amendments, one
wasn't.
dealing with Epstein and Sotomayor. I brought it up previously. We
You did.
have such an issue in this nation with the sex trafficking, human trafficking rings that have proliferated across this country, and it is damaging the lives of women and girls. We have got to step up and help them. Getting to the bottom of what happened with this Jeffrey Epstein case is going to be an important thing to do. And it should be at the top of this committee's to-do list as we fight some of this proliferation of CSAM.
There were 122 amendments, I believe, filed. I did not know that you would have
177.
177 amendments filed, so I have to confess I didn't know that you'd offer that amendment. Happy to discuss it with you, but I want to point on the record. You and I have never personally discussed this, have we?
We talked briefly on the floor at the
You never
conclusion.
mentioned what the subject matter of your amendment was. You said you wanted to offer your
In
amendment.
committee, I brought up the subject matter of my amendments.
Not in my
3 weeks
presence.
prior. Yes, sir. It was, I'll pull the transcript for you.
I wish you would.
Thank you.
I wish you would. Thank you, Mr. Wray, for being with us today. And you have perhaps some questions in writing coming your way very shortly. Hope you can respond to them promptly. Thank you again.